Hi everyone, and welcome back to another live stream here at the Australian Reptile Park. We hope you're all doing well and you're staying safe at home. Again, it's myself, Jake, and Zac is again with me here today. The last time you may have seen us here, we were actually in this exact spot, and we had a look at two venomous snakes, two Australian venomous snakes, the tiger snake and the mulga snake. And we actually milked some venom from both of those snakes to tell you a little bit about our snake venom program that we run here at the Reptile Park. Now, today we're going to look at another venomous snake species, in fact two more, but we're going to zone in a little bit on taipans specifically. Now, if you haven't heard much about taipans, you don't know much about them, I'm going to tell you all about them, but what you should know is they are one of the most incredible groups of snakes in the world. They are, of course, extremely dangerous, well known for their venom toxicity, which I'll talk about, but they are, in their own right, beautiful, beautiful snakes. And I think most people that work with reptiles will agree that they are one of our favourites. Now, there's actually three species of taipan found in Australia. We're going to have a look at two of those here today. The first one we'll have a look at is the inland taipan. So I'm just going to grab this snake out and then I'll tell you all about this species. Might just concentrate just for a moment.
While Jake's doing this, guys, make sure you share this with all of your friends, tag your friends, anyone who'd be interested in it.
Alright, what I might do is I'll come down just to here. Lovely little patch of sun there. Of course, it's still winter, still very cool during the day, but a lovely little patch of sun like that might warm this snake up a tiny little bit. Now, the inland taipan, I guess the thing they're most well known for is their venom. They are widely regarded as the world's most venomous snake species. And the way that we get to that conclusion or that result is by looking at their LD50 or their, their lethal dose. Now this is measured using rodents. So taipans, all the taipans are extremely toxic to mammals. That's what they've evolved and what they're designed to be feeding on. And they can incapacitate a rodent extremely quickly, and there's good reason for this snake to have such toxic venom. You get a bit of an idea as to why they do have such toxic venom when you look at where they come from. The inland taipan is found in a very remote, arid part of the country. Where you find this snake is in southwest Queensland and also parts of South Australia. Really a place where very, very few people go, certainly hardly anyone lives. And that is where these snakes have evolved to live. Now, it's a very harsh, arid environment, as I mentioned, and where these taipans are living is down in the deep soil cracks down in the ground. The habitat in that part of the country is known as black soil. You get all this cracking clay, you get these deep channels and tunnels that run beneath the ground, and that is where these snakes are spending the vast majority of their time. Now, down in those tunnels, that labyrinth of burrows, is also where their food is living. And the main food source for the inland taipan is, as I mentioned, rodents, but more specifically, the long-haired rat, which is actually a very large native rodent. It has big claws and big teeth and could certainly do a lot of damage to the inland taipan if one were to be bitten in the process of killing that rat. So, what the inland taipan does, it'll bite, it will release, and then that extremely toxic venom works very, very efficiently and really doesn't give that rat much of a chance at all. Certainly not much of a chance to bite this snake, injure the snake, because the snake does not want that. He just wants a bit of dinner. And when that rat has died, the snake will use that forked tongue, which is flicking now. It'll pick up on scent particles down in those burrows and tunnels. It'll follow that scent trail right to where that rodent died, and then they will, of course, begin to swallow it down whole, just as all snakes do with their prey. Now, the inland taipan, as you can see, is a fairly relaxed, fairly placid species, particularly in a captive environment. Don't get me wrong, wild inland taipans and some captive inland taipans can be extremely dangerous and very, very nerve-wracking to work with. And don't get me wrong, they can certainly do a lot of damage if you were to be bitten. Of course, very, very toxic snake. However, in saying that, no one has ever died from the bite of the inland taipan. There has been quite a number of bites that have occurred both in the wild and in captivity with snake handlers. But fortunately, all those people have been able to get to medical attention, to get to anti-venom, and they've survived. There has never been a single death attributed to this species, the inland taipan. Now, I wish I could say the same for the next species we're about to have a look at, but I cannot. So, on that note, I'm going to pop this inland taipan back into his bin here, and we'll move on. You can see a reasonably large snake. This one is about 6 foot long on the dot. They can get up to about 7.5 foot for a really large one, and quite a long, slender snake. Now, at this time of year, the inland taipan is very dark in colour. They do go through what we call a seasonal colour shift, and basically what happens during summer when it's quite sunny, they can turn quite a light yellow colour, and that means that they don't really need to absorb heat too readily. What they do need to do in winter is just that, absorb heat, so they turn a much darker colour. Now, Zac's waiting patiently there with that taipan. We won't make that snake wait any longer.
We probably won't get as close to this one as we got to the last one.
Now, coastal taipan is not a snake that you leave sitting on the ground for too long, uncontrolled. But now that Zac's got that snake behind the tail, he can use that snake hook that you would have seen us using to kind of control the front third of the snake and ensure that it doesn't do anything too naughty. In saying that, coastal taipans, they are probably the most dangerous snake that you can work with in a captive setting. There is some species that might come close to that as well. You know, king cobras, they can be very dangerous. Some of the mamba species, again, very, very dangerous, very similar, long, slender, highly toxic snake. But the coastal taipan is right up there. Now, unlike the inland taipan, which occurs, as I mentioned, in that remote part of the country, the coastal taipan has a fairly large range, and as the name implies, the coastal taipan is found along the coast. So where you would find this snake is really from a couple of hours north of Brisbane in Queensland, right up the Queensland coast, right up into the Cape, and then across. You don't get them in the Gulf or anything like that, it's too dry, but once you hit the top end, around Darwin, Kakadu, those areas, you find taipans again. And then they are also found over in the Kimberley. So really there's, I guess, 3 main populations found throughout northern Australia. And then the same species is also found in New Guinea. Now, in New Guinea, they do look very, very different. And in fact, for a long time, they were regarded as something completely different. But we now know that genetically, they are the same snake. It's just a geographic variation of the species. Now, as we might have seen before on our previous venom episodes, Zac's going to milk this snake. And what he first needs to do is just restrain that snake on that nice soft pad there, which you can see he's done quite well. And he's now got the snake behind the head. And what he's going to do is encourage that snake to bite onto a vial. Now, that vial has a tiny piece of plastic film stretched across the opening, so theoretically the snake bites, the fangs pierce that plastic, and venom should begin to collect at the bottom of the vial. And it most certainly is quite a large amount of venom there, and still running like a tap, as you can see. Now, I don't know how well you'll be able to pick it up on the camera there, but the fangs of a coastal taipan are extremely large. In fact, they do have the longest fangs of any Australian snake. On a taipan this size, you might be looking at fangs over 1 centimetre in length. So a really impressive fang length for any Australian snake, which typically have very, very short fangs. A perfect example of that is your brown snake family. All those species have tiny, tiny fangs. That's certainly not the case with the coastal taipan. Now, I mentioned before when I had that inland taipan out that they are widely regarded as the world's most toxic snake. The coastal taipan doesn't come far behind. This is widely regarded as number 3 in the world for venom toxicity. And the brown snake sits somewhere in between, but at the end of the day, it does not really matter what bites you, whether it's a coastal taipan, inland taipan, eastern brown snake. You would be in a lot of trouble if any of those species were to bite you. Now, Zac's going to let that snake go. This is actually probably the most dangerous part of the operation, because right now, whilst that snake's being milked, it's still very much capable of biting and injecting still a lot of venom. And now Zac's got to get that snake back into the bag. Just like that. He's going to twist that bag up, and now that snake will go back upstairs and will go back into its enclosure. But while it's been down here, it has done its job. It's played a very crucial role in the venom program and has supplied us with a little bit of venom. And we might take a closer look at that venom just there. Now you can see on a coastal taipan that venom is, well, there's a lot of it for starters, a very, very large yield. But it's also kind of a cleary, pinky kind of colour. So it looks a little different to some of our other venoms that you'll see from Australian snakes. For example, the mulga snake has a very dark, rich yellow venom. Doesn't tend to be too dark in the taipans. Now, if we look on top of the vial there, you can see where those fangs and some of the teeth actually punctured through that plastic. And that is how you milk a snake, and that's something we do on a very regular basis here at the reptile park. We have a lot of snakes, so we actually only have to milk each individual snake about once every 2 weeks. But yeah, it's a very, very important role that we play in the production of anti-venom, and that's exactly where this venom is going to head off to. It's going to head down to Melbourne. That's where the process begins of anti-venom production. I'm going to hand this off to Zac. And what I might quickly do is just talk about snake bite first aid before we get into some questions. Now,
so guys, before Jake goes on, let's start sending through those questions so we can get them answered for you today.
Perfect. So when we're talking about Australian venomous snakes, the first aid procedure, if you were to be bitten, is incredibly simple. What you want to have on hand, ideally, is one of these. This is called a compression bandage or a pressure immobilization bandage. And I do highly recommend, if you spend a lot of time outdoors, bushwalking, camping, fishing, that sort of thing, like one of these in your back pocket, in your backpack, in the car somewhere. You never know when it may come in handy. Now, the taipan is a bit of an exception, but before I mentioned that most of our Australian snakes have very, very tiny fangs. In fact, even a big 6 foot, 7 foot eastern brown snake might have fangs about 2 millimeters in length. So a very, very tiny fang. So typically, that venom isn't injected very deep. Where that venom is injected is into the lymphatic fluid located just below the surface of the skin. So by applying broad, consistent pressure to that bitten limb, you can slow down or reduce the rate that that venom travels throughout your system, and that will buy you time to get yourself off to hospital. Now, the important part of the demonstration, how do I put one on? Well, say I was to be bitten on the hand here, what I would do is get rid of this ring and get rid of this watch. Jewellery, it's just going to cause issues and it's hard to bandage over, so just get rid of it. You would bandage around the bite site 2 or 3 times, about the same tension that you would for a sprained ankle or wrist. Now, these newer bandages are a bit fancy. They have these tiny rectangles on them, brown or green, and when they're stretched to the appropriate tension, they turn into a square. So you can see it is reasonably taut, and that's kind of the level that you want to be applying this bandage to. Now, I'm not going to do my entire arm, but you would if you were bitten for real. You would extend the bandage right to the top of the limb, immobilise that limb, immobilise the victim, and get them off to hospital as quickly as you possibly can. Especially with something like a taipan, there is no way that you want to be mucking around or taking chances with that bite. You take it very seriously, get to hospital. When you get there, the medical staff will assess the situation and determine whether you require anti-venom or not. Quite often you may not require anti-venom. Many snakes will give you what is known as a dry bite. They bite you, but they do not inject any venom. It's kind of like a warning bite. If that's the case, you want to sit in hospital for 10 or 12 hours, nothing's going to happen to you, no effects, no symptoms, and then you'll get to go home. But if you were to be bitten and you were to get a bit of venom, like we saw there today, more than a bit of venom, then you would be in a very, very bad way. You would be incredibly unwell, life-threatening stuff, and yeah, the bandage certainly slows the onset of those life-threatening symptoms. So very important. I'll hand that back to Zac.
How do you
get into some questions?
Yeah, how do you make it into anti-venom?
It's a great question. So how does the raw venom, the dangerous stuff, go from being incredibly toxic and lethal to the anti-venom? Well, what we'll do, we'll supply it to Securus down in Melbourne, and they will take a small amount of the venom that we've supplied, and they will inject it into a horse. Now, the reason they use horses is because they're really large and they have a lot of blood. And that blood is a very important part of the process. As that horse is beginning to produce antibodies to that venom, they'll begin to draw blood from the horse in fairly large amounts. They'll then separate that blood out into its various properties, and the part that they want is the plasma. That's the good part. That contains those now venom-resistant antibodies that the horse has built up over a period of months, and then that, I guess the byproduct of that blood, those antibodies, are what are processed, purified, and turned into the anti-venom. So it is a long, lengthy process, but you still require the venom for it, and yeah, it works very, very well, the end result, the anti-venom.
Can they bite through the bags?
It can bite through the bags, yeah. There's been many a snake handler that's come unstuck by a snake in a bag. They can absolutely bite through them, especially something like a taipan with those really long fangs. So whilst they might be in the bag and you can't see them anymore, you still almost need to treat that bag as the snake, as if you would the snake, because that bag can be just as dangerous.
Do taipans lay eggs or give live birth?
It's a great question. Many snakes do both. Sorry, not the same species will do both, but some snakes give birth to live young, some snakes lay eggs. An example of a snake that would give birth to live young would be a death adder or a tiger snake or a red-bellied black snake, all species we have here at the reptile park. But the taipans, they absolutely lay eggs, as do most snakes.
What colour venom does the inland taipan have?
It's a really good question. It's very similar. It's kind of like a clear water like venom. So yeah, all of the taipans have fairly clear venom.
And do you milk them as well, or just the coastals?
So we only have a couple of inland taipans here at the reptile park because we don't actually milk them, or aren't required to milk them for the anti-venom process. Because coastal taipans give a substantial more amount of venom. Basically, we just milk those, and their venom can be used to produce the taipan anti-venom, which can be used to treat all of the taipan species. So we only need to milk one species, but that covers all of them.
Are both of the snakes that you've shown today, are they full grown?
More or less, yeah. They're very large individuals at least. You might get a coastal taipan that might get a little longer than the one we saw here. Same deal with the inland taipan, they might get a foot or so longer, so 30 centimetres, but both of those are adult snakes.
And maybe the last question for today, now that the coastal taipan's been milked, has it still got venom?
Absolutely, yes. So you might have seen, if you looked close on the head, they'll have those huge bulbous parts just behind the eye. Those are the venom glands. And when we milk the snakes, we're probably getting maybe 20-30% of what's in those glands. So it is by no means dry or safe now that it's been milked. It can still deliver many, many lethal doses immediately. Alrighty guys, well I hope you enjoyed that little glimpse into some taipans. Taipans are one of my favourites, one of Zac's favourites. They really are incredible snakes. Don't let the fact that they're so dangerous scare you too much. They are scary snakes, but they are fascinating in their own right, and I hope you enjoyed it. Now, we are going to keep doing these live streams, of course, for at least a few more weeks, so stay tuned every single weekday. We've got, of course, a lot of people stuck at home at the moment, as we all are, so if you are interested, particularly for the little ones, in keeping them busy, we do have a fantastic activity pamphlet or booklet that we've put together. You can head to the Reptile Park website to see more info on how you can grab that. And also we have our Pay It Forward campaign going, where you can actually utilise your Discover voucher. You can donate it, and that will be used in turn to help some people in need. So fantastic cause there. All right, guys, we hope you enjoyed that, and we will see you next time. Thanks so much for tuning in.